Have you ever wondered where the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment and acted from that place? Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your host, Brian Berneman, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world. We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers. From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and I have the pleasure to be joined all the way from Melbourne, Australia, just, across the pond here by Amrit Sandhu. Thank you so much, Amrit, for taking the time, for being here, and for I know already it's going to be a wonderful conversation. And for everybody that is watching and listening to us, Amrit, can you share a little bit about you and your journey?
Oh, wow, Brian, it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's actually an absolute honor. I love the work that you're doing in the world with conscious action. And yeah, we discussed a little bit around this, your values, my values, and it feels really yummy to be here. So thank you so much for having me, bro. Today Amrit is a life leadership and career coach, helping people basically live in alignment to, if we look under the hood and we don't have the sort of muggle conversation, but more the wizard conversation around it, helping people live in alignment to their purpose and lead teams with a more purposeful, more, I want to use the word enlightened, but it's probably a bit too far-reaching. But alignment is a really strong word for me. In alignment to their values, in alignment to their purpose, being the leaders that they know they want to be, rather than having to be an old archaic command and control sort of leader. So that's what I'm up to, but that also means leading themselves in the world. And so when you unpack, life, leadership and career coaching, that sort of is what people are looking for. And that's why, all the branding specialists and stuff has helped me support and put myself out in the world that way. But ultimately I see myself as a purpose coach. And in fact, I would argue as much as people see me as a purpose coach, I see myself as a purpose coach, but at the heart of it, really, I see myself as a health coach, but I don't talk to you about nutrition. I don't talk to you about, getting out. Well, I do talk to you about getting out in the sun, but but not so much about your movement and your gym protocols, etc. It's just that my story has taught me that the biggest part of positive mental health and a healthy mind and a healthy human being and a healthy system is one that is aligned to their purpose and the reason they were put here, satisfying their innate curiosities, cultivating their passions, and living a life that is their fullest expression. And as you can probably imagine on this podcast, I'm sure you following in on some of the epic stories of your previous guests, I'm sure you can relate. Yeah, that wasn't always, Amrit, just wake up one day and it's like, I'm going to help people with their purpose and finding meaning so they can be the most vibrant version of themselves. My journey started, I've had two of the biggest struggles in my life, and it's interesting to start the story that way, because ultimately what you will find again and again, and I found this through having coached 260 people more one-on-one deeply, most of them for year-long journeys, is that your pain actually signifies your biggest potential. And so one of my biggest pains was early university days, coming out of high school. There was a big culture clash growing up as an immigrant in the Western world, and just the cultural differences between my home life and the outside life, and trying to integrate the two of those, was a world of hurt. I didn't know where I belonged. There was no sense of belonging. I wasn't able to connect with people authentically. It was just a difficult time. And when I finally popped, by popped, I mean like my whole world came crashing down around me. I ended up in a psychologist's office, and they basically said, you've been struggling with depression for about 6 years. They prescribed me medications. My GP at the time, in her infinite wisdom, gave me a mindfulness exercise, which I'm so grateful for that woman. Like, had she not gifted me, that one simple 5-minute interaction with my GP where she was like, "Oh, I know you've been prescribed, antidepressants, but here's a breathing exercise." Which the arrogant young male that I was, touch wood, I was like, "Breathing, shut up, breathing, like breathing. We all breathe. Come on, I'm 20. I'm breathing. I'm human. I'm alive, right?" I look back at myself and I'm just like, man, you knew nothing. Touch wood. The humbling experience for sure. But the breathing opened up because when I took my first antidepressant medication, I remember feeling amazing as at that point, and it was like, oh my god, my life can feel this way. And then 4 hours later, I came back down to baseline reality, and I was like, oh shit, I'm back to where I was. And then I could see the yo-yo that was being prescribed to me.
Yeah.
And it did not feel right. Like, just like I was naturalish oriented, inclined enough to sort of, I looked at the box like it was like a spider and just sort of put it in the bin, touch wood. And I hadn't had any experience with the breathing exercises at that point, but I was in some anxiety provoking situations. And by some grace of God, the breathing exercise came to me and I just tried it and it worked. And I was like, whoa, like, I've, the one chooses the wizard, Harry. Like, this is like something's going on here. And so, yeah, that started a massive fascination down the rabbit hole of breathing, led me to mindfulness, led me to meditation, which ultimately enriched my spirituality, which touchwood growing up Indian, there was already some deep spiritual roots there. And, just to give you an idea of what the bubble looked like when it was popping, when I popped, I was like, I was asked to leave university because of, poor academic performance and all these other things. Like, I was losing my girlfriend at the time. I had 3 jobs and I was struggling to keep them all going. Like, it was an intense period, I lost a lot of my good friends. They just, didn't want to talk to me, didn't want to know me anymore because of how I treated them, etc., because of who I was. So it was a very intense bubble that popped. But the blessing that came to me from there is, again, mindfulness, meditation, self-awareness, things that weren't working, how to rewrite them, how to reprogram them. That has been an absolute gift. And the reason I share that, the university piece, especially around one of them, is because from that point, I moved cities, doubled down, started to focus on, really getting my education, setting up my life, etc., through the process of healing myself and my journey. And, did really well at university, actually, touch wood. And I don't say this to gloat, but I say this because I owe it to the award that I got, because when I got gifted the award of, like graduating at the top of the university for that year, they, there was an interview process as part of it. And they said, why should we give you this award? Top of engineering, top of the university across all degrees. And I was like, well, I don't know about your other, pool of candidates, but I was asked to leave this university when I had poor mental health, and I have the opportunity to graduate top of this university with positive mental health. And it's just an ode to the role that mental health can play in our lives, when that's the exact same person just carrying a different state of mental health, right? Touch wood. And they heard that story and, lo and behold, they bestowed me with the award. So I almost owe it to them to share that story with you guys, because it makes a seismic difference when you're down and out, what you're like, and when you're living in alignment, what you're like. And so that landed me in this amazing opportunity where, when I graduated, I could have my pick of any job I wanted, basically, as a very attractive young candidate out of university. So I got my pick of the jobs, pick of the litter of the jobs. And I remember the first day I went to work, I remember seeing my CEO at the time, regional director, actually, sorry, he was my regional director, and going, oh yeah, this ladder that I've just started to put my first foot on goes there. And I remember looking at him and going, I don't find this gentleman very inspiring. Like, a lot of the toxicity that I had worked on, touch wood, to overcome through, my own depression, I can see present in this individual. Like, it sounds very judgmental, but it was a level of self-awareness that I had touch with it. I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. This environment has people similar to who I was, but I've been working really hard. And I was like, you know what, maybe I'm the next generation of, this organization, and things will change as we go on. And therein pursued my second biggest challenge was 7 years of some pretty serious career misalignment. I can joke and laugh about it now, but yeah, it wasn't pleasant. I felt like every day I was going into work and literally having the soul sucked out of me. Touch wood is the one way of putting it. And I'm very conscious when I say that I hate saying that because of NLP and stuff like that. But it really felt really, really intense. Like rubbing the cat energetically the wrong way every single day. The work I was doing was 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 6 days a week here in Australia. I joke when I share this from stage that, I basically had my midlife crisis by the age of 30 instead of 40 because I put in the same amount of hours by the age of 30 than 40. And then I'm not any more special than anybody else. I just felt the friction and the pain. But yeah, that ultimately, eventually it got to the point where just I harbored the sentiment, if I'm honest with you, Brian, that I was going to be the change that I wanted to see in the world. That's always been this Mahatma Gandhi quote that I've sort of kept close to my heart, touch wood. And yeah, I just thought that being in the organization, things would shift and change. And I could feel after about 7 years that things weren't, that wasn't true, it wasn't going to shift, it wasn't going to change, and that I was actually a square peg in a round hole, and it wasn't really working out. So therein lied this existential crisis where I was like, well, what's next? Like I have no idea. And there's a lot that sort of transpired, especially over that last 12-month period. We can discuss that further. But yeah, in that process was actually where the Inspired Evolution podcast was birthed. I was inspired by coaches, speakers, agriculturalists, people that were like sustainable entrepreneurs, green entrepreneurs, people that were living life on their own terms. Yeah, I don't know. I just could see people having an impact in a positive way and actually living their life in alignment to that, and actually living quite well, making a good means to an end for themselves through their offering, through a positive impact. And I was like, touch wood, this is, why am I unable to do this? Like, I've been quite well educated, touch wood, and yet I feel like I've hit a dead end. And from the outside looking in, everybody was like, you've made it. It's like, bro, it is so hollow. Like, it is so like desolate and like desperate in this space. Like, it does not feel like I've made it at all. Yeah, so it was a really interesting place to be. And that was the place where the Inspired Evolution was birthed. There was all these people that I was inspired by. And I was like, hey, I'm going to interview them once a week. And hopefully after about 200 episodes, I will have learnt something. It would have been like my own education. And maybe I can model some of their success into my life to living life on my own terms. Yeah. And so I was inspired to evolve, and hence Inspired Evolution, the podcast. And that was the second biggest, breakthrough for me, I would say. The first, depression, touchwood, gave me meditation. And the second biggest challenge, career misalignment, gave me the podcast, which has been, my school ever since then for the last, 6.5 years, 6 years now. Yeah.
Wow, Amrit, thank you so much for sharing that. I often ask everyone that I'm having conversations during the podcast, or even whenever I'm running events here in person, to share their stories. And I actually, the other time I was starting with the semester with my university students, and the first class, it was all about introducing each other. And I was telling them, there's such an importance in getting to connect with each other, hearing where we're coming from, understanding a little bit better, our ways, our programming, our conditioning, everything that makes us who we are now. Because as you said at the beginning, this is where you are now, but that all happened, and that actually informs how you are now, and it allows you to share with others what it is that, the message that you're bringing. And that is for me, as you're saying, inspired evolution. This is where I find the inspiration a lot of times in people's stories, in people's journeys. They don't need to be exactly like mine, but there's, in a lot of them, I can see small things that is like, oh, wow. Like sharing, for example, that your doctor prescribe you with breathing. It's like, how many doctors out there are actually doing that? And
Right?
it's, I find it so interesting because nowadays, like, it's not only through stories like yours, nowadays it is proven scientifically how that helps, how mindfulness and meditation practices and breathing practices actually have an impact on our brain, on our mental health. Like, there's actual proof nowadays. And it's like, and still, how many doctors are out there, and a patient goes in and sees them and they are anxious, depressed, or whatever state of mental health they are going through, and all that they are doing is perhaps prescribing medication, antidepressants, that it's not that they aren't good, like they can support. They're not going to solve the underlying issue. And and when I heard it, when I read it as well, and on your story, I was like, oh wow, like how amazing it is that that person was there, that synchronistically that happened to you, and that opened the door for for a very different way of being, and what you're doing and practicing.
Yeah, it completely. I look back at that 5 minute interaction often, actually, and just express so much gratitude for it, because it changed so much of my trajectory. Like, my trajectory in life is so different because of that 5 minute conversation that GP had. And even the way she had it with me, she was Thai by background, so I think that had some influence on where she was coming from. I was actually She was my GP in Australia. The GP writes you a like a mental health plan, and they prescribe you and they hand you off to the psychologist.
Yeah.
And then, because the psychologist was across the hall from her, as I was leaving, she was like, "Hey, before you go, can you come and see me?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I went back to see the GP, and I was sitting there, and she just took the 5 minutes out of her day. She's very busy. Like, she now works on like really intense stuff. I won't go into the details of that, but she took 5 minutes out of her busy day to just sort of say, "Hey, by the way, how did that session go for you? Also, I used to do a bit of mental health work myself. Here's breathing." And I look back in just how much her generosity and care in that moment, just really, really set the entire trajectory for a young man in a very different direction. And it's, as a coach, it's very inspiring. Just the small conversations that we can have, even this podcast, touch with the potential for the ripples in these short bursts, like just meeting you in the right place at the right time and what they can do. Yeah.
I remember when I was a teenager and I started to get into all of this. I've been really fortunate to get into this world.
Actually.
And one day I went to see one of my teachers, and she was one of my energy healing teachers. And I went to see her, and I was like, you won't believe what happened. This really synchronistic thing happened. And I told her, and she's like, wow, so wonderful. Now, can you see how everything that is happening is synchronistic? How can, she invited me to see how does my perspective shift if I see everything as synchronistic, even the things that I might be judging as negative or bad or whatever. It's like,
as I didn't want it. Yeah.
There's, how can I see it from a different place? How can I see the learnings from that? And of course, as you were sharing your story, you're working in that office, in that job, and perhaps during that time, it's a challenge. Looking back, it's a gift, that shows you how to be and how to choose differently and how to support others doing that. And this is where a lot of times I share with a lot of my clients and my students is like, there is the what we can see from a different perspective, and then the day-to-day, like you need to actually live it, and then what are the practices and the ways to allow yourself to navigate through whatever it is that you're going through, so that then you can get the gifts from that and you can get the learnings.
Yeah, it's profound because you start looking, even when challenges come your way, you zoom out and you go, how is this on the way, not in the way? What am I learning from this? And challenges perceived as a, use the word perception, so perceived as a learning opportunity, and a very rich learning opportunity. Oftentimes, and this is how nerdy Amrit gets on the energetics, a question that I find myself asking is, okay, so if I, if I am already zooming out and getting a bit meta and going, oh, this is a challenge and it's probably on the way, not, it's on the way, not in the way. How am I somewhat bypassing the challenge? through perspective, like how much is this tea bag of pain and suffering meant to steep to make the tea the right temperature and taste? And it's like, Amrit, no. I've spoken to a few people on the podcast on this question, and unanimously they've always just been like, no, you've got your tools and you're meant to apply your tools to the best of your ability. And my mum's old saying comes back into my head, which is God helps those that helps themselves, So yeah, we're meant to have these tools, touch wood, and they're so helpful. But yeah, sometimes I do wonder if the tools are too helpful.
Well, like this is the interesting thing. I was talking with someone the other time, and we started talking about this, and it was around, like, in a sense, toxic positivity, and like, and it's just like, everything is, like, and I told her, when I go through my days, what I realize is that I am focusing on the direction of what I want to go and how I want to be and how I want to live my life. And whatever arises, I will still allow myself to process it and redirect the energy that needs to be redirected towards the direction that I want. And it's not through what I used to do when I was a kid that was repressing those experiences and those feelings. It's about allowing them, embracing them, and still doing that. So it's not, for me at least, it's not about bypassing, it's about allowing and choosing. And that is where, as you're saying, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, if someone that is listening to us here is actually choosing I'm positive, everything is okay, and not looking at what is happening, not allowing what is taking place, then yes, that's bypassing.
Yeah, there's more of an energy of suppression in that space, in the latter, whereas in the former, and I think the acceptance is a very huge piece, right? Inspired evolution, touch wood, I've been called out, before. It's like, how are you so positive? And I was like, touch wood, like, no, the inspired evolution is recognizing that the waterways are getting fucked as we speak, right? The temperature is rising, whether it's man-induced or not, the temperature is fucking rising. We can measure that, yeah? Enough with the blame game, but temperature's rising, what are we going to do? Yeah? And so from that point, yes, we can see all the challenges that are present. Like, you can continuously landfill and eventually you're going to run out of land to fill, right? So there's all these challenges. And from that point of like, okay, accepting that and going, now I've got a choice, like you said, right? What is my choice? Do I go, oh, it's all fucked anyway, fuck it, doesn't matter, let's just, I'm just, it's all doom and gloom and it's all not going anywhere. Let's just have a last hurrah on the Titanic as it's going out, or it's like, actually, this is, salvageable, and absolutely, there's an opportunity for us to, be inspired and evolve and, be a regenerative species on this planet. It's like a huge call on my behalf. But, from that place, choosing optimism because of the orientation that it sets you on. And it's full well knowing that, you might be completely fucking wrong.
Mm.
Yeah. But knowing that the alternative is just that much worse.
Mm. Yeah. I often share with people a lot of times, especially as you're saying, the focus
Much worse.
on the orientation of where, like, where are we looking? Where are we putting our energy? Are we putting our energy into the, like, trying to blame others, or to, like, stay with the status quo or things? Or are we actually doing something? And by doing something is doing something with myself. Because if I am not actually taking responsibility for my part in all of this, both from a physical, mental, energetic standpoint, then how can I expect anybody else to change? This is one of the things, as you're saying, there's, I, I see a lot of times this, part of my practice has been in the Buddhist teachings, like, enlightenment not only is possible, enlightenment is already here. Like, we
Yeah.
are enlightened.
Yeah.
We just don't know that we are that. This is, a lot of times when I see a lot of my clients, it's like they come for a healing, and I'm like, well, you're already whole.
You're already holding.
Like, but this helps the
Yeah.
orientation of the work
Yeah.
that needs to take place, because,
Mhm.
I'm not healing them. They're already whole. All that I'm doing is I'm enabling them to see themselves as that already.
Mhm.
And that is where, we live in this beautiful dualistic universe
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
that is like,
Contradictions to the
yes.
max.
And it's like, well, I'm already whole. I'm not experiencing being whole. Like,
Yeah.
what's in the way? But if I don't even believe that I'm whole,
Mm.
how do I get there? That is for me a lot of times, like, one of the keys of understanding, like, that, in a sense, as you're saying, that inspired evolution. Like, it's really interesting because we're not evolving anywhere. We're already there, no?
Mm.
Yet we still need to take those steps because we're not experiencing that.
Mm. Yeah, it's an incredible trip as well, because as we continue to reach for things, the yeah, I've started to notice when people say I want, and just the frequency of wanting.
Mm.
I want, and I'll make it super mundane just so it's easy to feel into what I'm trying to say. I want the house. I want that house. I want that house. I want. I want. I want. I want. I want. I want. I lack. I lack. I lack. I lack. I lack. They literally mean the same thing, right? Touch wood. Which is where then you start tuning into the like energetics of like manifestation, abundance, etc. It's like I have. I have. People say, oh, but then you're like stretching yourself beyond what you actually have. And it's like, no, start with what you have, like actually have. Like,
Mhm.
I have a home. I have a home, and I'm so grateful. Like, I have a home, and then how that resonates and how that fills up your cup, and you call in so much more from that space. But the key thing in there is, like you said, acceptance, because the more we want, the more we, reach. In some ways, we'll do also the more we sort of pin ourselves in the opposite corner to a
Mm.
certain degree.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the energetics of that fascinate me again and again and again and again, actually.
Yeah.
Because I find myself, it sounds like I've mastered it. I'm not the master of it. I find myself in that space,
Mm.
time and time again. It's like, oh, I wonder if I could hire this person for my team and that would help. And it's like,
Mm.
oh, I want. I can see the want. And it's
Mm.
like, this is what you're lacking.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you call this in a whole way? And it's
Mm.
like, okay, you just accept that for the next little bit, you're aware that this is a hole that needs filling in your team. Just carry on. Maybe put an ad up, see what happens. Someone will appear. And sometimes the two people that are currently like doing most of the heavy lifting in my team just came from the universe. Like, literally,
Mm.
it's bizarro how it happened. Touch wood, but it's just trusting and accepting.
Mm.
And interesting things can happen. Yeah, very
Mm.
interesting things can happen.
And as you're saying, one of the biggest things that I have learned from my own experience has been that gratitude space, like being grateful, because that is what unlocks what needs to come. And that is the thing, I find it A lot of times I talk with a lot of people through the years, and and different people measure success differently. As you were saying in your own story, like from an outward perspective, when you were working that job, perhaps you seemed successful, but in your inner experience, that wasn't the case. And one of the things that I keep on sharing with people is, it's about how we are doing, like our own experience, and being grateful of what we have. Like most people are, as you're saying, all of the time oriented to, look at that person, they have that big house, or they have that, or they don't know. We don't know what they are going through. We don't know all of the aspects of their lives. Like they might have a lot of money, but they might be miserable. It's like, do I actually want that in my life? Or do I want to be well and to be grateful of what I have, to open myself to the flow of what needs to come from me, instead of trying to live someone else's life?
Yeah, there's a really powerful mantra that I have adopted, which I find really useful in this space right at this juncture of the conversation we're having, which is, and I invite anybody that is willing to adopt it because I'm in love with it, which is, what is meant for me will never miss me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, take the good with the bad. It's just like, but what is meant for me will never miss me, right? And if it's meant for you, it is coming. Yeah, just rest your grits, stop overcooking your mind. Just, it's coming. It's coming. It's patience is the key, but it's on its way. Yeah, and learning to just trust in that a little bit more, because oftentimes I feel, having coached 260 people one-on-one, quite intimately, deep journeys, most of them year long. Yeah, there's a lot of push. And it's interesting that you mentioned gratitude, because I feel like we are going through a collective shift, and maybe to sort of put that into context at the moment is, I hate the word levels, by the way, but I'm going to use the word levels because that's just what sort of comes with this territory. But just so we know, I hate the word levels, because if you wanted to rebrand spirituality, it's unity, right? Spirituality is unity, and there's no levels in unity. It's like, I'm more unified than not. Shut up. So, but in there's levels, right? So within the levels of consciousness, level 1 is where life is happening to you. And this is unanimous across multiple schools of thought, schools of philosophy, religions. So life at level 1 of consciousness is happening to you. Life at level 2 consciousness is happening by you, right? Life at level 3 consciousness is happening for you, and life at level 4 consciousness is happening as you. So if you go back to level 1 is life is happening to me, you're a victim, right? Before, when I was struggling with that depression, life was happening to me. I had no idea that breathing could change my state. I went to the psychologist. She taught me that I could implement new value systems and I would transform. And I was like, I'm malleable? What the fuck? Huh? I didn't even know, right? I didn't know level 2 life could happen by me. Life was just happening to me. And you mentioned the word gratitude, which is why I introduced the levels, because the silver bullet for anyone where life is happening to me and you're a victim and you're a victim and you're a victim, you can pop that bubble real fast by implementing daily gratitude, right? That happened to me. And it's like, why did it happen to me? Well, there was a silver lining. Oh, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for this. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for her. And I'm grateful for him. And I'm grateful for them. And I'm grateful for this. And I'm grateful for all of that. That gratitude, you're already starting to pop right into level 2. And then there's the level 2, which is where everything is happening by me, which is like, and I call that person the achiever, right? You can achieve. And that sounds a little bit like the example you gave before. Not everybody that has a big house is upset, but there are some people that, and I've coached some really interesting people. One of these gentlemen had 3 cars in his garage, all very nice luxury cars, massive house in possibly the nicest area in Melbourne. And, you're having these conversations with him and he's got it all. Like all the toys, all the big boy toys you can imagine, right? And you're speaking to him, and they're not everybody that is wealthy is like this, financially well off is like this. But I was speaking to him, and he's just like, Amrit, it just feels so empty inside. Like I just don't see the point in any of it. It's complete apathy, touch wood, in this particular instance. And for me, that person has clocked level 2 consciousness. They've able to achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve and achieve. But at a certain point, that's when the level 3 conversation opens up. It's like, and for some people, it's not that they don't clock it. It's they might see someone pass away really close to them, touch wood. Unfortunately, it's you get confronted by like, oh, I'm not in control. So level 2 is all about control because you achieve, right? Level 3 is all about surrender, where life is happening through, life is happening for you. Man, at that point, you're surrendering, you're flowing, and it's a whole different way to be. This is the conversation you started off, which is like the challenges that I'm having, they're also my blessing, touch wood, because life is happening for me. And that's a very level 3 consciousness conversation. And then level 4 is, there are some enlightened people around on the planet, bless them, and life is just, they are it and it is them and it's all happening. I can't really speak to that experience. But again, even, as I say this, again, I hate the word levels, because it sounds like once you've made it, there are certain points where, even today, I'll be in an argument with my partner and I go straight into victim. Like my defensiveness comes up and I'm like, no. And then it's like, oh, I'm being defensive. Oh, victim mindset. Oh, okay, stop. And I can hear myself. So even though they're levels, they sound like you graduate. I feel like it's a spectrum. And in some areas of your life, you're level 3, some areas you're 2, some levels, sometimes you're 1. Generally, I find that if you continue to like try to elevate, you will find yourself, in different spaces with some really amazing tools that are available to you in this space. I think
I remember, like, sorry to interrupt. I remember my teacher. He, he used to talk a lot of the time about one of the practices on our daily lives. At least, like this was coming from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, is about expanding your awareness, expanding your awareness, expanding your awareness, expanding your awareness, expanding your awareness. And touching on what you were just saying, he used to say that everything that is happening, there are situations in our lives. And depending on our awareness level, let's call it using that word, then situations can become problems or they can just be situations. So depending on how I am in those moments present, how I am with my awareness, then anything that is taking place can become a problem, can become a challenge, or it can just be. And I can be with what is, I remember when I was starting to practice and I was driving and I used to have road rage at that point, and and someone cut me off and then I realized, once it started to change in my everyday life as well through the practices, I realized, that was just a situation. I have no idea if that person perhaps is, having an emergency and they are rushing to the hospital. Like, why in my head, the story that I was telling myself immediately was, that's an asshole, he's cutting me off, instead of like, I should give him space, he's in a hurry. Why is my story in my head going to a super negative one, whereas I have no idea? And the being able to expand my awareness gave me that space to relax into myself and to allow for a very different perspective of life. And it's this, like just allowing more, surrendering to the experience, because guess what? We have no idea. Like we have no idea about most anything. And the more that I learned, and the more that I realized I know nothing. This has been one of the really interesting things. Yes, I know a lot of information, a lot of knowledge. But the more that I know that I don't know, and this has been amazing. And to in my life, to be able to expand my awareness, to be able in a moment to notice, this is what it is. That's it. I'm not going to put any judgment into it. And the more that I work on myself, to understand through interactions with people, through my work, through my own inner practice, is like, where are those buttons that if someone pushes them, I'm going to get out of that level of awareness and I'm going to come back to a very close-mindedness and I'm going to get triggered.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's quite the journey that we're always on that as well. The triggers will always be there and the opportunity for us to do the work will always be present as well. And as you were sharing as well, I clearly remembered one of my dear friends lost his partner about a year ago. And when I got the call to go visit him, like I remember me driving down the freeway and I remember how many people I pissed off on the road as I was doing that. But I was, second on scene and it was just what was required at the time. And I remember looking back going, shit, I don't think I'll try my best not to judge anyone else because now the shoe's been on the other foot. And I think therein lies, a bit of because ultimately what we're discussing is compassion. Yeah. And I think empathy is quite an amazing tool on your way towards compassion as well. I find myself being able to empathize more and more, given the more awareness I bring to my own situation at times as I'm living these moments fully, that it gives me the opportunity to empathize with others more, like as I'm becoming a parent now, or I'm a parent now, but as I'm becoming more and more of like, stepping into that role, I'm able to empathize more and more with other parents, and so I can totally just bury my head in the sand and just be like, oh yeah, I'm a dad, whatever. But it's like, actually, what does it mean to be a dad? What does it mean to be a father? What does it mean to role model? What does it mean to, hold space? And, so yeah, I think the self-awareness piece is an ever deepening pond, actually, that enriches yourself, but ultimately yourself for the opportunity for your interactions with others ultimately. As well.
I like we're talking and this is sometimes really universal stuff. We're talking about awareness, we're talking about compassion and empathy, we're talking about gratitude, we're talking about breathing, some things that are in a sense so simple. This is why a lot of times I love all of the different traditions that I've been introduced to. They are so simple. And we are the ones that overcomplicate it.
Well, Brian, I would go as far as, sorry to cut you off, but I would go as far as saying that when someone is complicating something, maybe I've been jaded by personal development, but, there's a part of me, like, having a podcast for like 6.5 years dedicated to personal development with like a spiritual bent, and having been working on myself now for actively working on myself for over a decade, one thing I've bought enough snake oil. I'll go as far as saying to when someone's complicating something, I literally just they're selling me something. Especially the wisdom. Wisdom is always simple. And simple doesn't necessarily mean easy, right? The power of now. Eckhart Tolle is like, just come back here now, and then the mind goes, but what about? And it's like, hey, wait, stop it now. And it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. So there's a delineation between the two. But the wisdom is always simple. Human living is meant to be simple. The basics are the fundamentals for a reason. They've been working for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And it's inspiring for me. And this was the point I was making before, is like, I think we're going through a collective shift where people are literally, society is shifting from level 2 to level 3 consciousnesses itself, because more and more of us are having these conversations that you and I are having right now, right? The fact that there is free media and we could be talking about anything, but we're talking about this, and if we are just emanations of consciousness and, we are just full surrender, even without our, little peppery egos in the way, not to be demonized, but also to be celebrated, but also to be put back in their place. Like, man, it's pretty cool that consciousness is collectively having more and more of these conversations where we're all diving into more surrender, more flow, more feminine, I would say, less masculine, but hey, that's just my perspective. Yeah.
Oh, well, definitely. I mean, like, from that perspective, as I often share with a lot of people, not only we are moving as a collective towards that remembrance of more of the feminine and the allowing That's just, how do we live that in our lives, and how do we incorporate all of the feminine energy? Because this is one of the things, I keep on talking to so many people, and a lot of people don't understand. Feminine energy doesn't mean that you're a female,
Yeah, it's
we all have all of the energies, and we need to bring it to balance. And this is where, as a society, we are out of balance from that. We went so much into the masculine that now we need to get back into balance. And this is one of the things that I often share, both for individuals, organizations, and as a collective. We don't need to go on the other side of the pendulum. We need balance. We need balance. That is where we need to go. And yes, for a little bit, there's a push towards the other direction with the pendulum. But ultimately, the goal should be, let's balanced.
Yeah, and I think there's an integration is the word that sort of comes to me on this journey of balance. Like, I think balance is the ultimate outcome, and the process we're currently going through is an integration, which I think is a much more supportive word than the old ways are dying, the new ways are coming through. Touch wood. And just to elicit my humble awareness on, I totally share your sentiments on male, female, masculine, feminine. They're often conflated, and it's not necessarily the case. Like, I'll be the first to say, touch wood, that I'm a male with feminine energy, right? And
likewise,
what does that mean? Like, and again, for some of my mates, and like, these are some of my close mates, like, what, you got man boobs, bro? It's like, no, it's got nothing to do with that, brother. It's actually got to do with the fact that, quite simply, the way I look at it, and for you guys to sort of make up your own mind, but the feminine energy, you can just rebrand as love. Just like I rebranded spirituality before as unity, right? Touch wood, if we had to. If you had to rebrand femininity, it's just love, right? A mother's love. It's called that for a reason, right? Love. Yeah. And if you had to rebrand masculinity, it's just purely freedom. Yeah. It's freedom oriented. Yeah. So freedom is masculine and love is feminine. Yeah. In its shadow, love is clingy. Yeah. And in its shadow, freedom is fleeting and escapism, right? So, and all that means is that as a bloke, I'm love oriented rather than freedom oriented. That's all that means, And so in my shadow, I've noticed I'm clingy, right? In my shadow, I'm not, I'm going to run away from this. It's like, better hold on. Yeah. And your shadow is a really easy place to identify because you see your propensities again and again in this 3D reality, right? And it's like, I'm driven by love. I want to love more. I want to express more love. I want to, this expression of the inspired evolution is, how do we fill the world with more love? Now, ultimately, inspired evolution is also, for a lot of people, about freedom, right? Because it's about, how do I break free from a reality that doesn't serve me anymore, right? Absolutely. But it's not what's driving me. Yeah. But absolutely, it stands for freedom and love. And there comes in that balance that we're talking about. And there are women that are driven by freedom. Yeah. In its base sense, yeah, most women are love oriented and most men are freedom oriented. Absolutely. Right. That's where, have you read David Dider, The Way of the Superior Man? It's an interesting book. And many people online have started to reference it more and more. I read it quite a while ago. But it wasn't for me. Yeah. The Way of the Superior Man is written for men with masculine energy, right? It's written for men that are freedom oriented. And that doesn't necessarily have to be everyone. There are men that are love oriented. You resonated with being a male, feminine oriented. Your thoughts?
Like for me, a lot of times with the masculine and feminine energy, for me, a lot of times is, what are the qualities, that, as you're saying, you framed it with love and freedom. A lot of times for me, it's around the qualities, one is more receptive, one is more allowing, one is more flowing, the other one is more direct, the one like it's more sharp, it's more action oriented. And the balance of all of that, I think it's the beautiful thing. And it's not saying anything negative about one or anything negative about another. We all experience life differently, and we're all here to experience life and to bring our own uniqueness and our own perspective. What I often share, and this is why I love having these conversations, is about what is the right thing for me at this moment of time. Like, how do I feel in alignment and balance at this moment of time? And it's not like, Amrit, how do you do that? It's like, what you do, it works for you. What I do works for me. And it's like, yes, we can be inspired. We can be like, like that actually resonates with me. I'll take that.
Inspire each other's evolution. Yeah.
And I'll see how I actually incorporate it. But that's the thing. It's like, this is one of the things for me of being able to have these conversations, and I'm sure that you do in your podcast. I get inspired by certain things, and then it's like, how do I incorporate it? This one, doesn't work for me. That one works for me, and that is the key.
Yeah. I think it's there's a profound wisdom in knowing what is for you, and one of the things I find myself sharing in coaching a lot. Especially for people that are at a juncture where they're like, I'm interested in this. Some people are like, I don't know what to do next. And some people are like, I could do this, I could do that, I could do this, I could do this. Like, it's the extreme opposite. And, I often have to sit them down and have the hard chat, which is like, hey, you can do anything. Yeah. I hate to be the guy to tell you can't do everything. You've got so much energy to channel in, touch wood, but please channel it in one direction. There's been parts of my journey, even in the Inspired Evolution, where I was, coaching, speaking for multiple organizations, I remember doing the audit one year, first year of the Inspired Evolution really took off. And I looked at like the 9 different things I was doing: public speaking, coaching for another organization, Inspired Evolution, public speaking, coaching, podcasting. And I ended up with 9 different vehicles. I was like, man, what a great year for the Inspired Evolution. I moved a meter in each direction. But then as I did that self-reflection exercise, I looked back and I was like, if I only did 2 things or 1 thing, I would have moved 9 meters in one direction, or like 7 and 2 or 6 and 3. And that would have been more useful ultimately towards whatever I was channeling all of my energy into, rather than scattering all my chips. So absolutely meeting yourself where you're at and what's present for you. And then, sometimes making the hard call is like, okay, this is what deeply resonates, and I'm going to learn to prioritize and focus it and get a bit masculine about it. And, let's follow through. Touch wood.
Yes. Yes. Amrit, I want to honor your time so that I could talk to you for hours and hours.
Actually, so do I. Yeah, I feel like we're just getting started.
I know. But just to honor your time, I would love for you to share one last thing that you feel like at this moment you would love to share with everyone that is listening to us.
Something that's been just, present for me recently has been, I don't know how to articulate this, and I think some people will label it as intuition, and I think you're pretty close to what I'm trying to speak to, but I just, again, having coached all these people one-on-one, having, spoken in so many different countries, people come up and thank you so much for your talk. I knew I was made for more, or I knew there was, I knew that wasn't right for me. I just knew, and I've just been hearing this word, I knew. And I don't know, maybe it's just where I'm at in my journey, but there's this knowing that is, and I'm glad you didn't ask me too much about it, and we're running out of time, because I don't really know how to talk about it. I don't really know how to articulate it, but and that's kind of what's drawn me in even as well, the fact that even those that are tuning in, like there are things that you just inherently somehow know, like that is for me, that's not for me, or the job that I'm in isn't the right one for me. Like you can describe it, like you can do a logical sort of blah 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 blah, but there's oftentimes there's this underpinning, like it's almost like your rational mind is this tip of the iceberg, and underneath there's this knowing that you carry, and I'm just fascinated by it because I find when I'm coaching people, oftentimes I'm just giving them permission to dive deeper into parts of themselves that they inherently know, but refuse to look at, or have intentionally sectioned away, or potentially have had some trauma, or someone's talked them out of it a couple of times, or judged them for it, and they've sort of suppressed it. But it's really remarkable, this intuitive being. Intuitive sounds like a gateway opportunity to sort of get to the knowing. Again, I can't articulate it, but you asked me the questions. I'm doing my best to put words to it. That's something that really fascinates me, and I'm learning more and more around just just the mystery that is emanating through our lives, and what is that knowing? Like, how do you just know this? But you do, right? And it's your deepest truth, right? And yet you have never given voice or words to it, and yet is your truth. Like, what the anyway? No, that's what's
for that. I remember once one of my teachers told me, most of things in life that are in the depth of experience, we don't have any words to explain them. Like, we cannot use words to actually describe what that experience is like. It's just, you feel it, you experience it, you cannot use words. And yes, perhaps intuition or an inner knowing gets close to there, but it's not even that. And it's like, my teacher used to tell me, the more that you spend time with yourself, the more that you keep on understanding how you can tap into that space that you're talking about now, the easier it is to listen to it, or to be with it, and to actually allow that to be from where your life unfolds. And that, it's like we all already know our answers, yet most of us, as you were saying, we've been conditioned so much, we've been programmed so much, and we have been traumatized so much that we don't even know how to listen to that inner knowing. And therefore, we're behaving in ways that perhaps are out of alignment from what we want to do. But we could keep on talking for hours. So, Amrit, for everybody that is listening to us, if they are resonating with you and what you're sharing, where can they find you?
Oh, absolutely. So the home of everything I do is pretty much on YouTube now, the Inspired Evolution podcast. If you work your way over to YouTube/Inspired Evolution, you'll find everything related to the podcast. There's meditations on there guiding you on your journey. I publish coaching insights as well, similar conversations to what we're having here. If I find myself having them a few times, I'm like, well, I'm just going to put it out as a video, record it, me talking to camera just like this, and then, publish it out. So there's that. And there's, some of you might be interested in having deeper conversations with me. That's what the coaching container exists for. And there's a whole bunch of, I think there's 60 odd testimonials at the time of this recording on the YouTube channel. You can go check out some of those testimonials. And if, they inspire you to say, oh, this is an interesting journey of transformation that someone's gone through, there's a link below there for you to be able to book into a coaching call. But one of the things I find myself again and again just reflecting to people is, it really helps if you know your values, on this journey, trying to be aligned to who you really are. Your alignment really is, and the way I describe it is, your values are the pillars of the temple that is you. And if you don't know your values, like mine's a connection, contribution, celebration. And that just makes everything so much easier. I know how to make decisions. I know who I am. I know where my conflict points arise when someone's not connection oriented, but they're more integrity oriented. It's like, absolutely, from a place of integrity, you're right. But from a place of connection, I'm also right. And we don't need to fight, So knowing your values, and when it comes to decision making, the whole reason I coach, speak, podcast, connection, contribution, celebration is the most alive in all of those containers, right? So it's so useful to know your values as like a real foundational, grounded starting point. And 20 minutes from now, you could know your values. inspiredevolution.com/values. It's a free training, completely on me, complimentary. 20 minutes from now, you could have that level of clarity. And it just it's been such a game changer. You remember, like, you know, the psychologist, she gave me the meds, but she also gave me the opportunity to realize that I was reprogrammable and I could install my own values. And you can do that for you. Yeah. Like, you can literally write your own code. You could literally be like, these are my values and this is what I live by. Let's go, you know, and, you know, you've got that as a template, and it's just so, you free up so much bandwidth not being somebody else, like we just discussed, right? Because you know who you are. You are these 3 pillars. These are your core values. Might be 4, might be 2, but generally it's 3. inspiredevolution.com/values. 20 minutes from now, you'll know your values. Yeah, I highly recommend people check that out. All things podcast related, inspiredevolution.com. All things Amrit coaching related, amrit.coach. But yeah, check out YouTube, do your values. That's my invitation to you. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Amrit, for sharing. As I said, for everybody that is listening to us, if you resonated, go and check that out. You know, as I keep on telling everybody, I don't care if like you stop watching our show and go and watch that one day. Whatever resonates with you, go and do that. You know, I'm not like that. That's the way of doing things. This is the way, you know, with my values of connection, collaboration, celebration, and compassion. Like, this is the way of doing this. So thank you so much, Amrit, for taking the time. And hopefully we can have more of these wonderful, inspiring conversations.
Oh man, it would be such an honor to continue these conversations with Brian. Yeah, you know, like I said when we caught up prior to the podcast, which was just, your values, my values are literally like, I think that they actually are the same. They're just worded slightly differently. You have 4 C's, I have 3. But yeah, man, there is such, it just expands my heart to know that, you know, like I've been dedicated on a path for like 6.5 years of the Inspired Evolution, just to feel that, you know, there are other brothers and sisters out there, brothers such as yourself, just, you know, doing the exact same thing in the exact same way, just, you know, giving it their all and just, you know, championing this work. It's, man, I can't tell you, like, it makes me emotional. I'm just really glad that you're there doing your thing. It's so beautiful. This has been such an amazing podcast, man. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you so much for having me, bro. Your questions have been amazing.
Thank you. And thank you everyone as well for listening to us. As I said, if anything resonated, leave us a comment anywhere and go and check out Amrit's work with the Inspired Evolution podcast. And we will see you all on the next episode. Thank you, Amrit. And we'll see you all. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.